Hello guys, so today we are gonna be looking at the Berlin defense, knight to f6 at the third move in the RuyLopez or the Spanish game. So RuyLopez starts after moves e4, e5, knight f3 attacking the e5 pawn, knight c6 defending the e5 pawn, and bishop to b5 pressuring the knight on c6. Now black has few options, but the Berlin defense starts after knight to f6 attacking the e4 pawn, I'm sorry. So here white has a few options. First is to castle, which is the most commonly played move, and we're gonna look at second. And there is the move d3, which is not as popular as castles, but it's still played on the highest level. So we are going to be looking at d3 first. So d3 is known as the anti-Berlin variation in the Berlin defense. So there is no knight takes e4, and here black usually develops this dark square bishop to c5 to the most active diagonal for the bishop. So white here plays the move c3, following the main ideas of the RoadtoGM. If you don't know what the main ideas are, I recommend you to watch my video in the basics of the RoadtoGM. So after the move c3, black castles, white castles, and now some move d6, and now white can play knight bd2, defending the e4 pawn, trying to play d4, striking into the center of the board. So in these positions, in the anti-Berlin variations, in the moment when black plays the move a6, we never take this knight. Never ever. We drop our bishop back to a4. After b5, we want to play bishop c2 so that we overprotect this pawn on e4. So bishop c2, not bishop b3. Although this diagonal looks nice, there is nothing into it. So after bishop c2, we are ready to strike into the center with the move pawn d4 after some preparatory moves like rook e1, knight f1, knight g3. We will blow up the center with the move d4. So this is the main idea of the anti-Berlin variation, which starts after the move pawn to d3. And here we just looked at bishop c5, but black can choose to play d6 on the fourth move here. d6 is a little bit passive, because this bishop cannot develop to c5 anymore, but it will develop to e7, or even after g6 develop to g7. So black has some alternatives to bishop c5. So d6, we still play the move c3, trying to control the center with our pawns, like we develop pieces and control the center in the RoadtoGM. So after c3, now black develops his dark square bishop to e7, as I said. Now we castle, black castles, and the rook e1. And the theory goes a6. As I said, after a6 we never take the knight on c6. Although computer doesn't hate it, but for humans it's really hard to play without light square bishop. So we drop it back to a4, and after b5, as I said, to c2, overprotecting the e4 pawn. So after move like rook to a8, this is still theory. Now we play knight bd2. Black drops his bishop to f8, trying to fulfill his plan with g6 and bishop to g7. Or just leaving his bishop on f8 and then play h6. And this bishop is a really nice defensive piece supporting this pawn chain. So after bishop f8, we play knight f1. We continue the normal RuyLopez maneuver, which I explained it in the basics video. So go to watch it if you haven't already. And now, as I said, black continues with his plan g6 or h6. In this particular variation, black chooses to play h6, and we fulfill our maneuver with knight to g3. Now we are ready to play d4 into the center. But black has his own ideas. He can try to play d5 as well. So the anti-Berlin variation in the Berlin defense is quite positional. There are not many trades, and there is a lot of pawn breaks to be considered. So this was the anti-Berlin variation after knight to f6 to play the move d3, solidify the center. But the most commonly played move is castles. And after castles, the whole idea of putting knight to f6 was to capture this pawn on e4. Although there are a few other possibilities which are not to capture this pawn on e4, and one of them is to play bishop c5 now. And after move d3, we would retranspose into the anti-Berlin variation. But white doesn't need to play d3. In this position, I recommend you, and the theory goes as well like this, you take this pawn on e5. It might seem like a blunder, but after knight e5, we have this central pawn fork, a very thematic fork in many openings, like in the 4 knights Italian, which I'm gonna just show you. After knight c6, if you play knight c3, knight f6, and bishop c4, now here black has this idea of central fork. So after knight takes e5 in the Berlin defense, black recaptures the knight, and we play pawn d4, forking these two pieces, and we have a slightly better position. But black doesn't need to take on e5. Black can take knight takes e4. He takes the pawn. And now we have this move queen to e2, attacking the knight. And it seems like we will win a piece, because after the knight moves, we take this, let me just show it, knight f6, let's say. We take this pawn and we win black queen because of the discovery check. So black must not retreat his bishop after queen to e2. He must capture our knight on e5, and after queen to e4, he must play the move queen to e7. And we still have this central fork idea, which is the best move indeed. After move d4, now black has only one move, although there are two possibilities. After the move knight to c6, our queen is attacked by black queen, and there is no time to recapture this bishop on c5. So we take this queen, and black of course recapture with the bishop, so we wouldn't emerge with a piece up position. So after bishop takes e7, we now play the move c3, and this is the end of the theory in this variation of the Berlin defense. We will play the move rook e1, we will develop this bishop to e3 or to f4, and this knight belongs on f3 with the moves knight bd2 and then knight to f3. White has a really pleasant position. This pawn chain is really good. It cannot be attacked easily by black. And as I said, after, I don't know, like rook to e1, after castles rook e1, if black now chooses to play the move a6, we don't take the knight. In this position, of course, we take the knight because the bishop is hanging. But if if we play like rook e1 and rook e8 and knight bd2, and now a6, we don't take the knight, we retreat it to f1 this is the common plan in all of the variations of the Berlin defense. This bishop from b5 usually goes back to f1. So this is variation after the move. Castles and bishop to c5. Now we will look at the main lines, which goes after castles. Black, of course, takes this pawn on e4. Now white has two possibilities. After knight takes e4, white can play d4 and rook to e1. d4 is the main move, although rook to e1 is played often as well. So we'll first look at the move rook to e1. Now black has only one move, this is knight to d6, attacking our bishop on a5. And now we don't defend this bishop, we take this pawn on e5, with knight takes e5. This is a very common position in the Berlin defense of RuyLopez, and here the same tactic applies. Black cannot capture our bishop on b5 because of this discovery check and winning the queen. So after we take the pawn with knight takes e5, I'm sorry, here black has two options, they both retranspose to the same variation. Black can take this knight first and then play bishop e7, will then play d4. No, I'm sorry, not d4, but we will move our bishop back to f1. As I said, this is the common idea in RuyLopez and the Berlin variations. We retreat this bishop from b5 to f1. So black castles, we play d4, bishop f6, and here we drop our rook back to e1. Although in the World Chess Championship, when Magnus Carlsen was playing against Sergei Karyakin, he played this move rook to e2. And after rook to e2, Karyakin played b6, the most logical move, and now Carlsen retreated his rook to e1. Carlsen can do these things, we humans cannot, because this is really, no, it's not bad, but it's really unlogical in this position. So we retreat our rook back to e1, and rook to e8 is played. We play c3, because if we play like, I don't know, h3, then he can take our rook and take our pawn, which is bad. So we play c3, defending the pawn. Our opponent will most likely take our rook, we will recapture back with the queen, and knight e8 is still theory. So after knight e8, black wants to play d5, maybe trying to put his knight back on f6, and here after knight e8 we play bishop f4, d5 will occur on the board, knight e2 trying to play knight to f3, and then bishop f5 is the starting position of this common variation in the Berlin defense. So I mentioned there are two possibilities after knight e5, rook e5. No, I'm sorry, after we take the pawn, there is a possibility of bishop to e7. I'm sorry, bishop to e7. After bishop to e7, we just retreat our bishop back to f1, and now black will capture our knight and we will retranspose to the same variation we just looked at. So knight e8 is played. No, I'm sorry. Rook e8 is played here. We play c3. We trade rooks and knight to e8. And we just looked at this variation. So after black takes the pawn on e4 at the move number 4, there is a possibility to play rook e1, but the most commonly played move is in fact pawn to d4, just offering another pawn. Black doesn't really want to capture this pawn, because after the move e4, we will play this move rook to e1, and f5 must be played, because otherwise, if black would defend with pawn d5, we'd just capture this pawn and double attacking. We would double attack the knight, and the knight would be loose. So taking this pawn is not considered very good, because there are just too many open lines to handle as black. So the most logical move in this position is, of course, the most commonly played move, which is the move knight to d6, entering the Berlin endgame or the Berlin wall. So our bishop is attacked, we take this knight on c6, black captured back with the d pawn, and we take this pawn with d takes e5. The knight has to move to f5, and we just trade queens with queen d8, king d8, and there are three possibilities for white in this position. I recommend you to play h3, and after the move h3, our idea is just to play g4, g4, knight g5, and f4. In this endgame, I must mention that this is the starting position of this endgame. We have 4 on 3 king side majority, and black has 4 on 3 on the king side. So like this. But black has these double c pawns, and that's why he won't get a passed pawn as easily as we are on the king side of the board. This is king's side and this is queen's side. So because of this pawn structure imbalance, our plan in this endgame is to play h3, g4, knight g5, and f4, f5, and create a passed pawn. So there are a few other possibilities. The most commonly played move is knight to c3, and the theory goes king e8, you play h3 now, trying to play g4, and black stops this idea with h5, so that after g4 the trade would occur, which is not the best for white, so white plays bishop f4, solidifying his position. Bishop e7 will occur on the board, rook a1, as white we want to put our rooks on the open and semi-open d and d files. So after rook a1, bishop e6 will happen on the board, and we'll play knight to g5, attacking the bishop on e6. And this is a very thematic position. There are a lot of high-level games. Most of them, of course, end in a draw, but this endgame is far from draw from here, of course. So this is the endgame after the move knight c3, but there is, of course, one other possibility. There is the obvious check with rook d8, I'm sorry. After king takes d8, there is rook d1 check, and here black needs to play king to e8, and we will just start developing our pieces with the move knight c3. We'll develop this bishop to f4, but problem with this check on d1 is that this rook usually belongs on e1 and this rook belong on d1. So this check, of course, is a tempo move, but it's not as good for white as you might think. There is one more variation I want to show you, which is after d4, knight to d6, and we just play pawn takes e5. It looks like a sacrifice of a bishop, because this bishop is completely free, and black will take it. After knight to b5, we play a4, and this knight is, as you can see, trapped. So the most logical move is knight to d4, and we will take this knight. And after queen to d4, black plays this move d5. We take this pawn en passant, and black takes back with the queen, which is the only move. And now we just shuffle around, and this is a pretty known draw. This draw occurred between Vidit and Alireza in the last round of the candidates, if you're watching, and this draw is very, very often in the highest level of chess. So there are a few lines after the Berlin defense. If you want to play Berlin endgame very, very well, you must study it on your own, look at some top level games, and you will know the endgame very well. So if you want to play RuyLopez on the highest level, make sure to subscribe down below, and make sure to like this video if you were enjoying in it. Don't miss my other RuyLopez video, and see you guys in another video.